Over the past 3 episodes, we've explored one of the most profound and perhaps least understood laws that govern human existence, the law of occult resonance. We've discovered that resonance is not merely a poetic metaphor, but a real process through which every human being continuously connects with the invisible universe. We've seen that each of us possesses the subtle structure necessary for these resonance processes to occur, a subtle anatomy, if you will, which is just as complex and fascinating as the physical one, if not even more. And we've discovered that we are literally immersed in an immense invisible universe filled with countless subtle energies with which we resonate every single moment, whether we are aware of it or not. But today, I'd like to take a step back. This is because throughout history, there have been discoveries that didn't simply add another piece of knowledge. They fundamentally shifted the way we understood reality. When science uncovered gravity, countless seemingly unrelated phenomena suddenly became part of one coherent picture. When we discovered the electromagnetic spectrum, visible light, infrared radiation, ultraviolet rays, radio waves, and X-rays ceased to be isolated phenomena, isolated mysteries. They became different expressions of the same underlying reality governed by certain precise laws. What if the same thing is true of our inner life? What if behind our thoughts, emotions, aspirations, habits, relationships, successes, failures, there exists a universal law that brings structure, coherence, and meaning to what otherwise seems and appears random? If we accept that the law of occult resonance is indeed real, its consequences are enormous. Suddenly, our daily choices are no longer insignificant. Our attention is no longer insignificant. The environments we live in, the people we spend time with, the ideas that we constantly contemplate, the emotions we repeatedly cultivate, all begin to fit into one coherent picture. Life itself starts making sense in a completely new way. What once appeared accidental begins to reveal hidden patterns. What once looked like coincidence begins to reveal lawful processes. And little by little, we realize something extraordinary. Everything is resonance. Not in the simplistic sense that everything merely vibrates, but in the much more profound sense that everything we repeatedly connect with gradually shapes our inner universe. Which means that whether we know about this law or not, whether we believe in it or not, whether we consciously participate in these processes or completely ignore them, we just simply cannot escape occult resonance. Every day, every conversation, every book, every song, every environment, every aspiration, every facial expression that we have, every fear, every act of kindness, every act of hatred, each of them triggers processes of occult resonance that continuously shape who we become. And that is precisely why this law matters. Because once you truly understand it, you no longer see occult resonance as an interesting spiritual concept. You begin to see it as one of the great interpretive lenses through which life itself becomes clearer. So today, we're bringing together everything we've discovered throughout this mini-series. We'll explore the far-reaching consequences of the law of occult resonance, why your life is already being shaped by it every single day, and most importantly, how understanding this universal law can fundamentally transform the direction of your life. If there is one idea I'd like you to remember from everything we've discussed so far, this is it. Every genuine process of occult resonance necessarily implies an exchange. Let's return for a moment to our radio analogy. When you fine-tune your radio to a broadcasting station, something very accurate happens. The radio doesn't create the music. It doesn't invent the words. It doesn't produce the signal. The station was already broadcasting long before your radio was switched on. The only thing your radio does is tune itself to the correct frequency. And the very moment a resonance is established, a continuous transfer begins. Two things flow from the broadcasting station toward the receiver. The first is the energy. The second is information. They are blended. The electromagnetic wave carries both the power necessary to reach the receiver and the information that allows the radio to faithfully reproduce the music, the voice, the news, every subtle nuance contained within the broadcast. Exactly the same principle applies to the law of occult resonance. Whenever we enter into occult resonance with a subtle energy from the macrocosm, we don't merely feel something. A real connection is established. And through that connection, a continuous transfer begins, not only of subtle energy, but also of subtle information, ways of perceiving reality, states of consciousness, ideas, potentialities that until then existed only in a latent form within us, are coming to life. And this transfer continues for as long as the resonance itself continues. The more intense the resonance, the longer we maintain it, the greater this transfer becomes. Which means that every moment we consciously direct our attention towards something, we are, in a very real sense, allowing that reality to gradually shape our own inner universe. Now, here's something equally fascinating. Imagine two radios tuned to exactly the same broadcasting station. One is a small portable radio with a tiny speaker. The other is connected to a professional 2000-watt concert sound system. Both receive exactly the same broadcast, exactly the same information, yet the experience is completely different. Why? Because one system possesses far greater power and a much greater capacity to express what it has received. It is what we might call a high-caliber system. Something very similar occurs within us. Two people can resonate with exactly the same godly attribute. For instance, the godly attribute of godly love. Both establish a genuine resonance. Both receive the same sublime energy, the same frequency. Yet one experiences only a faint glimpse of that state, while another feels completely immersed in an overwhelming ocean of love. Not because the godly attribute itself has changed, has modified, has shifted, but because their own inner instrument is different. Their vitality, their accumulated subtle energy, their capacity to sustain and express that resonance, their occult subtle power. This is one of the reasons authentic spiritual practice is so important. It doesn't merely teach us what to resonate with, but little by little it also refines and strengthens the instrument itself, allowing us to receive, sustain, and express these sublime resonance processes with ever greater intensity and stability, thereby becoming at some point even a secondary relay of continuous manifestation of that energy we resonate with in this very world. People we say are kind have indeed established a continuous resonance with the godly attribute of godly kindness, whose energy is omnipresent and everlasting. People we say are compassionate have indeed established a continuous resonance process with the godly compassion. And so on and so forth. Examples can continue. And it goes in the other direction too. People who are constantly hateful, angry, resentful, jealous, mean, cruel, etc., have indeed established within themselves a continuous resonance process with certain specific lower astral realms or hells, how they are called in many traditions. A tree is known by its fruit, and the specific resonance processes that we have awakened within us are known by the type of predominant states we have and the actions we perform as a consequence. When the resonance process with one or another reality becomes very strong, even our second nature, we can indeed say that we have developed a strong faith in that specific energy, in that specific resonance, as faith and resonance are extremely tightly connected. And we will dedicate an entire series to faith on this channel later on. Now, if every genuine process of occult resonance implies a continuous transfer of subtle energy and subtle information, an obvious question naturally ensues. Where does all that energy go? Does it simply disappear? Of course not. Just as a reservoir gradually fills, drop by drop, the subtle energies we constantly attract through resonance accumulate within our own inner universe. This accumulation is one of the most important consequences of the law of occult resonance. Every beneficial resonance, every harmful resonance, every noble aspiration, every degrading habit leaves something behind, a mark, if you will. Nothing is lost. Everything contributes, little by little, to shaping the person we eventually become. Think about it. Nobody becomes compassionate in a single afternoon. Nobody becomes patient overnight. Nobody suddenly wakes up wise. And equally, nobody becomes consumed by anger or fear or hatred in a single day. Character is not built in dramatic moments. Character is built through countless resonance processes that repeat themselves day after day. Little by little, what was once an occasional experience becomes a familiar state. The familiar state becomes a habit. The habit gradually becomes part of our character. And eventually, our character begins shaping our destiny. That is why our daily choices matter so profoundly, because every choice determines what we repeatedly resonate with. And what we repeatedly resonate with gradually becomes the very substance of our inner universe. You may remember that in our very first episode, we spoke about the importance of our inner world in this Resonance mini-series. Now we can understand why. Our inner world is not a random collection of thoughts and emotions. It is the living result of everything we have chosen so far, consciously or unconsciously, to resonate with throughout all our lives. In yoga, and not only yoga, we often speak about the aura, or the subtle energetic field surrounding the human being. From the perspective of occult resonance, this field is continuously nourished by the subtle energies that we attract from the macrocosm. Unlike the physical body, whose capacity is naturally limited, our subtle being possesses an extraordinary, we might even say unlimited capacity to grow. The more we resonate with beneficial, sublime energies, the richer, the stronger, and the more luminous this inner universe gradually becomes. This is one of the extraordinary aspects of our subtle nature. There seems to be no practical limit to how much we can continue to expand our consciousness through beneficial resonance. Equally, the constant attraction into our inner universe of malefic, destructive, nefarious energies by triggering specific resonance processes with the lower astral realms will bring about misfortune, suffering, deep depression, and a gradual breaking down, disintegration of that human being, who gradually becomes possessed by various categories of demons or devils, lower astral entities, thereby becoming their instruments in this world. And we see so much of this in the music industry today, for instance. It's almost ubiquitous. More on that in future episodes on this channel. Returning now to beneficial resonance processes that are constantly triggered in our inner universe, there is yet another fascinating consequence to this. After repeating the same resonance process again and again, something notable happens. It gradually ceases to require conscious effort. What initially demanded attention, discipline, and perseverance slowly becomes natural. Eventually, the resonance begins operating almost spontaneously, much like learning to ride a bicycle or driving a car. What once required your complete attention eventually becomes second nature, like we've mentioned before in this episode. The same occurs with occult resonance, whether beneficial or harmful. Virtues can become second nature, but so can addictions. Compassion can become second nature, but so can resentment and hatred. Love can become second nature, but so can indifference, which is the opposite of love. Every resonance we repeatedly cultivate eventually begins cultivating us. And perhaps this is one of the most profound consequences of this universal law. You don't become who you are by accident. You become who you are by what you repeatedly resonate with. At this point, an important question naturally comes up. If our present life is largely the result of the resonance processes we have cultivated over time, can we consciously shift them around? The answer is a big yes. But like every profound transformation in life, it doesn't happen by accident. It occurs through conscious participation in this universal law. If we have spent years cultivating certain resonance processes, we shouldn't be surprised if they don't disappear overnight, as they have largely become our second nature, like we previously showed. The good news is that the very same law that shaped our present condition can also become the law through which we can transform it. And every authentic transformation begins with 3 essential steps. The first step is to stop. This may sound surprisingly simple, yet it is perhaps the most difficult step of all. Before we can establish a new resonance, we must first interrupt the old one. Otherwise, we simply continue feeding the very process we wish to transform. And in order to achieve that end of stopping a certain nefarious state of resonance that exists powerfully within our being, there exists an extraordinary help that we can call upon. And it is called the godly attribute of godly stopping. By evoking within our being, by entering into resonance with, by accumulating within our inner universe, the subtle, sublime, omnipresent, everlasting, and free energy of the godly attribute of godly stopping, we will manage to create a very firm breach in any malefic or nefarious state of resonance that we might indulge in. When we actually manage to connect or enter into resonance with this subtle, sublime energy, it becomes so much easier for us to interrupt automatic patterns that have governed us for years even. Another immense help in this respect is the subtle, sublime energy of the godly attribute of the godly beatific void. Why? Because genuine transformation requires space. Just as a cup that is already filled to the brim cannot receive fresh water, a consciousness that is constantly occupied by old and nefarious resonance processes cannot easily welcome new ones. So when this first stage is successful, a stage that we have only briefly touched on in this episode, something remarkable happens and appears indeed in our inner universe. A kind of inner silence, a pause, a hiatus, a moment in which we are no longer completely identified with the old pattern, and we are yet to begin to enter in resonance with the new one. This is an extraordinarily precious moment, because it is precisely here that freedom begins. The second step is to choose, or perhaps more accurately, to choose consciously. Every resonance begins with direction, attention, intention. If we do not know what we wish to resonate with, our attention simply continues wandering among countless influences, pulled in every direction by circumstances, by people, by whatnot. Transformation requires clarity. What exactly do I want to cultivate within myself? Which godly attribute do I aspire to awaken within me? What kind of human being do I sincerely aspire to become? The clearer this intention becomes, the stronger and more stable the resonance process that follows. Naturally, this intention should always be profoundly beneficial. Not only that we see it that way for ourselves, but it is also in harmony with the greater order of life, the cosmic or macrocosmic harmony. This is why in the yogic tradition we perform the act of mystical consecration before engaging in an important spiritual action or an important daily action for that reason. Consecration aligns our personal aspiration and intention with the godly will, with the godly intention, allowing the resonance process to unfold in harmony with the universal order. And we will dedicate an entire future episode, at least, to this beautiful subject that is of paramount importance for each and every one of us. Now, the third step in our little journey here is to resonate. Now begins the real work. Not once, not twice, but consistently. This is where attention becomes one of the greatest powers available to the human being. In yoga, this capacity to focus one's attention is called dharana. The ability to maintain a steady, focused attention without allowing the ordinary mind to drift. Every time we consciously return our attention to the sublime energy we wish to cultivate, the resonance grows stronger. Every time we evoke it powerfully within our being, the resonance grows stronger. The transfer becomes deeper. The accumulation of that specific, subtle, sublime energy, in the case of a godly attribute, becomes greater. And little by little, what initially required discipline begins feeling natural. The new resonance slowly replaces the old one. The new us slowly replaces the old us. A new habit emerges. A new character begins taking shape. And eventually, a new destiny unfolds. This is the extraordinary promise contained within the law of occult resonance. No matter where we begin, the future is not fixed. Every sincere resonance we cultivate today becomes a seed from which tomorrow's character and tomorrow's life will gradually grow. At this point, some of you may wonder, but what about the tendencies we seem to be born with? Why does one person naturally resonate with compassion while another struggles so hard with anger, for instance? Why do some people appear drawn toward truth almost effortlessly, while others seem irresistibly attracted to destructive patterns? Are these differences merely the result of education, genetics, coincidence, or is there something deeper at work here? The esoteric traditions offer a fascinating answer through another great universal law, the law of karma. And what is truly remarkable is that karma itself can be understood through the very lens that we've been exploring throughout this mini-series, the law of occult resonance. But that is such a profound subject that it deserves an entire episode of its own, at least. So, over the course of these 4 episodes of this mini-series, we've discovered that occult resonance is far more than an interesting esoteric concept. It is a universal law, a macrocosmic law, that silently accompanies every moment of our existence. It explains why our choices matter to such a huge degree, why our habits matter, why our environment matters, why our aspirations matter, and ultimately why the quality of our life depends so profoundly on the invisible realities with which we choose to resonate. Once you begin looking at life through this lens, you start seeing resonance everywhere. And I think we finally arrive at one of the oldest and most mysterious principles preserved by the great spiritual traditions. Because after understanding occult resonance, or beginning to understand it, another quite extraordinary question naturally appears. Why is any of this possible? Why can the human being resonate with the macrocosm at all? Why are we capable of love, truth, beauty, wisdom, or compassion? What is it about our very nature that allows these sublime resonance processes to occur? For thousands of years, the great spiritual traditions have answered this question with one enigmatic sentence that can be found in different variations throughout these traditions. And this sentence is, man was created in the image and likeness of God. Most of us have heard those words. Very few of us have ever stopped to ask, what do they actually mean? Are they merely poetic, a religious metaphor, or do they describe one of the most profound principles governing the relationship between the human being and the entire macrocosm, and indeed God Himself? In our next episode, we'll explore one of the foundational principles of authentic spirituality, the principle of occult correspondence. The astonishing idea that the human being is not separate from the macrocosm, but a living reflection of it. And once you understand this principle, you'll never read that ancient sentence or look at yourself in quite the same way again.